Hello everyone, thanks for checking out the channel. If you like this video, please remember to like, and if you subscribe, be sure to comment below. I reply to every comment. I posted my camping experience on Reddit, hoping to share my harrowing story with others who might have encountered something similar. Last summer, I embarked on a solo camping trip to a remote forest in the Pacific Northwest. The serene beauty of the woods drew me in. But little did I know that I would soon be plunged into a nightmarish encounter with the supernatural. On the second night of my journey, an eerie mist descended upon my campsite, obscuring the moonlight. A shiver ran down my spine as I heard faint whispers in the distance, like the soft sighs of a ghostly choir. I glanced around nervously, peering into the oppressive fog that had enveloped my camp. The wispy tendrils of mist swirled around the trees, casting an ominous pall over the forest. I tried to shake off my unease and tend to the campfire, but I couldn't ignore the prickling sense of dread that had settled over me. The flames danced and crackled, throwing strange shadows across the trees. Their crooked branches seemed to twist into gnarled hands, reaching out for me. The whispers grew louder, a discordant chorus of lamenting voices. Compelled by morbid curiosity, I ventured away from the fire's comforting light into the sea of shadows. I scrambled up a steep incline, branches clawing at my arms and legs as I pushed through the underbrush. The full moon peered out from behind the clouds, bathing the forest in its cold glow. As I wandered deeper into the woods, the trees themselves seemed to shift and contort in the darkness. Sinister shapes lurked between the trunks, always darting out of sight as I glanced their way. It was as if the forest had come alive with restless spirits that whispered and beckoned to me. I stumbled into a moonlit clearing, where I saw her. The ghostly figure of a young woman in tattered clothing, her eyes hollow and full of sorrow. She stood beneath an ancient, gnarled oak tree, its limbs creaking in the wind. Her mournful gaze locked onto mine, rooting me to the spot. The apparition's lips did not move, but her voice echoed inside my mind. "Please, kind stranger, lend me your ear. I have been lost in these woods for so long, my spirit unable to find rest," she whispered. Her chilling words pierced my heart, even as the rational part of my mind screamed that this couldn't be real. I tried to speak, to ask her name and how I could help, but an invisible force clutched my throat. The phantom drew closer, her tattered white dress billowing around her feet, which did not quite seem to touch the ground. Her hollow eyes bored into mine as she told me of her fate. She had strayed from the path many years ago, lured by the beauty of the towering firs and the serenity of a secluded glen. But when darkness fell, she became turned around and lost her way. Exhausted and frightened, she took refuge under a great oak, never to wake again. By the time her search party found her body, her spirit was trapped between worlds. "Please, you must help me move on from this haunted place," she implored, her chilling voice echoing inside my head. I tried to back away, to flee from this unearthly encounter, but my limbs refused to obey. It was as if her ghostly presence paralyzed me. As I stood transfixed, more spectral shapes emerged from the looming trees. Their hushed voices blended together in a mournful susurrus, echoing the forest's own creaks and groans. These were not benign woodland spirits, but tortured souls who spoke of lives cut short and dreams left unfulfilled by tragedy and violence. They told tales of settlers who starved when winter came early, of loggers crushed by falling pines, of travelers who fell prey to the cruelty of bandits. Each specter shared their story as they encircled me, their chilling voices joining in a lament. I stood helpless, my heart gripped by fear and pity for these lost souls. The ghostly congregation grew larger as the full moon traversed the night sky. More spirits emerged from the shadows, some bearing fresh wounds that still oozed in death. They spoke of poachers' bullets and drunk drivers' remorseless vehicles, which cared not what they struck down in the night. As the chilling tales and whispered laments swirled around me, I felt my sanity strained to its limits. I had ventured too far and stirred up forces beyond my understanding. Now they besieged me, their cold spectral forms drifting closer until I stood at the center of their ghostly gathering. The night dragged on, the moon dipping low over the restless woods. Exhaustion overtook me. but I did not dare to sleep. I pinched myself, praying this was merely an awful dream conjured up by my wandering mind. But the ghostly congregation remained chillingly real and perceptible. At long last, the first glimmer of dawn pierced the eastern sky. The mist dissipated, fading away like the lost souls it had obscured. As the shadows retreated, the specters grew transparent, their mournful whispers fading on the morning breeze. In the soft, hazy light, the ghosts relinquished their hold on me and began to drift away. Like mere smoke on the wind, they scattered among the trees and faded from sight. In the distance, I heard the trill of a songbird greeting the dawn. The first mundane sound I'd heard in hours. I scarcely dared to breathe, half expecting the spirits to re-emerge from the shadows. But as the sun rose over the tranquil forest, the paranormal gathering seemed like a half-remembered nightmare. Had it been real, or merely my overwrought imagination conjuring up phantoms in the dark? In the calm light of morning, the woods appeared utterly benign once more. Nonetheless, I fled that haunted glen, crashing heedless through the brush until I burst from the tree line and beheld my campsite. I collapsed by the extinguished fire, more exhausted than I'd been in my life. I packed my gear with shaking hands before fleeing down the trail, grateful to be alive. Once I returned to civilization, I poured out my chilling tale on the paranormal threads of Reddit. I knew others would dismiss it as fiction or the delusion of an overactive mind. But I knew what I had experienced in those haunted woods, where restless spirits still lurk. Though I long to return to those tranquil woods by daylight, I will never set foot there again once night falls. For the ghosts remain eternally bound to that forest, and I cannot face again the wrath and despair of those tragic, tortured souls. Their plaintive voices still echo in my mind when I close my eyes to sleep. Sometimes I imagine I see their spectral forms drifting at the edge of my sight, bound to haunt me now as the only living person who witnessed their gathering. I pray they will find release someday from their purgatory in those timeless woods. But for now, their suffering lingers, and I alone remember their mournful tales. My story spread far and wide across Reddit, shared in hushed whispers on forums dedicated to the unexplained. Some offered sympathy and speculated I had stumbled across a portal between worlds. Others accused me of fabricating a campfire tale to frighten and titillate. But I knew the truth that waited in those haunted woods. Late at night, when sleep evaded me, I would trace the comments online, taking comfort from those who believed me. My story drew out others who had experienced the paranormal in those same woods over the years. They too spoke of unearthly whispers and ghostly forms glimpsed among the trees at night. One grizzled hiker had spotted mysterious flickering lights deep in the old-growth forest, as though candlelit spirits wandered its depths. A wildlife photographer described shadowy shapes that darted behind ancient trunks when she peered through her long lens. None had gathered the courage to fully confront the anomalies, yet neither could they stay entirely away. Those woods, they concurred, were imbued with a subtle dread, an unease that pricked at the primal senses. Yet even as they feared what lurked beyond the trails, they were drawn to traverse them again. It seemed the forest had marked them, taken some unknowable hold upon their hearts, calling them back to wander its misty paths. I too felt that irresistible allure, itching to load my pack and lose myself again in that labyrinth of soaring firs and maples. By day, I longed to gaze once more upon the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, smell the musty fragrance of decaying leaves underfoot, and listen to the soothing chorus of birdsong high overhead. But I resisted, unwilling to spend another night trapped among the mournful dead. Their chilling tales of lives cut short had shown me how thin the veil was between the living and the lost. I had stumbled into their realm and glimpsed the suffering that kept them from moving on. One moonlit night, I dreamed the ghostly woman in the tattered dress came to me again. Her sad eyes implored me, her voice echoing from somewhere far away. She spoke of the agony of lingering so long between two worlds, unable to fully detach from the living earth. I tossed and turned, begging her to find peace and release. She only shook her head, translucent tears glistening down her pallid cheeks. "It is you who must help me move on," she whispered. Return to the place you found me, and you will know what to do." As she faded, I cried out, promising to try, though I did not know how. I awoke drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding. Could I really help her spirit find rest? Perhaps she was damned to haunt those woods forever, unless someone living intervened. But venturing back there filled me with dread. Once again, I would be at the mercy of restless ghosts and the ancient darkness that cloaked their world. Nonetheless, her pained pleas haunted me over the coming weeks. I knew I had to make one last journey to the haunted forest. If I failed to act, the ghostly woman and others like her would remain trapped. And perhaps they would never stop calling to me, dragging me back to dwell among them. On the anniversary of my fateful trip, I returned to face my fears. A heavy mist obscured the dirt trail as I approached the woods, my pulse racing. But under the bright noon sun, the forest did not seem ominous. Birds twittered and squirrels chattered as I hiked deeper into the emerald maze. When I reached the glen where I had seen the ghostly woman, everything appeared tranquil. The great oak tree's branches swayed gently, leaves rustling. Motes of dust danced in the slanting sunlight. No spirits emerged to beckon me. No voices invaded my mind. Kneeling before the oak, I placed a bouquet of wildflowers tied with a crimson ribbon, a symbol of life to balance out the death I had encountered here. I poured out heartfelt prayers for the ghosts to find eternal rest, tears streaking my face. I promised to remember them and share their tales so they would not be forgotten. As I spoke, a warm breeze sprung up, swirling around me. It carried the faint echoes of whispers, but this time, grateful and relieved, rather than anguished or enraged. Above, the oak tree's limbs shifted and groaned. One low-hanging branch snapped off, crashing down mere inches from where I knelt. I stumbled back in alarm, gazing up at the tree. There, carved into the trunk, were two sets of initials within a crude heart. They had been hidden previously by the branch, but now were exposed. Those initials must have marked where the ghostly woman met her end, and perhaps the lover who had carved them. I knew then that I had succeeded in laying her spirit to rest. The woods around me seemed lighter, the very air sighing with a sense of closure. The ghosts had found peace at last, freed from their torment. I hiked back with a light heart, glimpsing deer, rabbits, and other living creatures. The forest now teemed with life, no longer overshadowed by the restless dead. That night, I truly rested for the first time since my ordeal. I returned to those woods from time to time, communing with nature and paying my respects to its spirit guardians. The ghosts are gone, but not forgotten. Their tales deserve remembrance, lessons for the living. We who still draw breath must appreciate this gift, for our time too shall pass. And we must tread lightly on ancient lands, knowing what still lingers in the shadows. The wild places hold memories we can scarcely imagine, connecting us to eras long past and those who walked before us. Their essence lingers, bound to the eternal land. So I share this story to exalt the mysteries of the forest, warn of the unknown, and remember those souls who have moved on. The veil between living and dead remains thin, parting at times to reveal what lies beyond. Not all who wander among the trees walk solely in this realm. We inhabit a land alive with invisible spirits, echoes of the past, and a constant whisper of the inevitable future when we too shall pass on. But for now we have under our feet the solid earth, over our heads the sun and stars. Let us revel in this moment we are granted and make it worthy of remembrance. I posted this chilling encounter on Reddit to warn others who might be tempted to dabble in forces they don't understand. My terrifying experience with a Ouija board is a cautionary tale that still haunts my dreams. It started out as a laugh, a way to scare ourselves one dark October night. My friends and I were bored, looking for a cheap thrill. Ouija boards seemed harmless enough, just a silly party game. We never imagined what would happen when we opened doors that should have remained closed. We gathered at my friend Mike's creaky old Victorian house on the edge of town. It was the perfect setting for our occult experiment, with flaking paint, groaning floorboards, and drafty halls that whistled eerily. We joked about summoning spirits as we settled into the dank basement, lit only by a few trembling candles. Mike produced the Ouija board with a flourish, laying the worn cardboard rectangle on the floor. The letters and numbers were faded, the wood planchette chipped. We snickered as we placed our fingers upon it, asking cliché questions in squeaky voices, mimicking what we thought ghosts sounded like. But our derisive laughter soon faded as the planchette remained still beneath our fingers. The dusty basement air seemed to grow heavier as the candles guttered. We posed questions, waiting in vain for any movement. The night seemed colder, and I drew my jacket tighter around my shoulders. Suddenly, the planchette quivered, then slowly crept across the board, making us gasp. It glided surely, no one guiding it, to spell out, yes. My unease grew as it answered more questions intelligently, giving a name, Anna, and saying it was a child spirit. My friends tried to hide their nerves with laughter, making jokes about cheap tricks. But our snickers grew half-hearted and hollow. Each answer was articulate and clear, sliding effortlessly to letters far from each other. There was an eerie purposefulness, too precise for accidental movements. I noticed Mike's hands shaking each time it was his turn to ask the spirit a question. His cocky bravado had slipped away, revealing the uneasy boy beneath. But some dark fascination drove us onward, deeper into communication with this unearthly intelligence. The candle flames withered to glowing embers, casting our faces in shifting shadow. Our questions grew bolder, eliciting longer responses. Anna told sad stories of her life and described her lonely death at the age of 10, details no one could possibly have invented. Pangs of sympathy mingled with my unease as her tremulous replies spelled out a tale of woe. She claimed to have perished in these very walls, her body buried secretly beneath the cellar floor. Mike's eyes widened at that revelation, his face gone pale beneath his scruffy beard. The planchette circled the board rapidly, then shot to the upper corner, where the word "goodbye" indicated an end to communication. But though we said farewell, the spirit remained close. The flickering candles illuminated strange shadows that lingered at the edges of our vision. Mike suggested we stop for the night, but a reckless curiosity gripped the rest of us. Spurred on by nervous energy, we resolved to make contact again. As we lay our hands on the planchette, the air grew colder still. Our breath came out in wispy puffs as we posed questions with quavering voices. At first, Anna's responses seemed weaker, as though diluted by distance. But soon, her answers grew stronger, more insistent. While her early messages had been polite, even charming, now sinister undercurrents colored her words. Thin scratches marred the board's surface as the planchette jerked violently. When we asked the spirit to prove its power in our realm, the lone bare bulb flickered. Heavy boots thudded on the floor above us, impossible in the abandoned upper floors. Mike whimpered softly, tears shining in his eyes reflected by the dying candlelight. I too felt unbridled terror rising in my throat like bile. But Sarah urged us onward, demanding the spirit reveal its darkest secrets. The planchette circled rapidly, an invisible force propelling it so hard it scratched the board. It spelled out arcane messages in languages unknown to us, scribbling madly until we pulled our hands away. As we huddled together, the feeble light dying, the air was torn by a howl that could not possibly have come from mortal lungs. Dark shapes darted around the edges of the room. A noxious odor assaulted us, tendrils of acrid smoke coiling toward the ceiling. Shadows gathered in the corners like living things. Cruel laughter echoed, inhumanely deep and raspy. Gleaming eyes glinted from nooks and crannies, blinking out one by one as nameless things crept nearer. We begged and wept, pleading with Anna to leave us in peace if she had any vestige of humanity left. The presence only grew heavier and colder, weighed down by malevolence. Mike was the first to break. With a strangled cry, he leapt to his feet and bolted for the stairs. Sarah chased after him, leaving Susan and I alone, gripping each other in wordless horror. No more questions arose to our lips, only whimpers and sobs. We hid our faces as the shadows converged. A bang from the top of the steps jolted us to our senses. Mike had slammed the door, sealing himself and Sarah in the upper rooms. Susan and I fled behind it, thrown open by an invisible touch as foul as icy talons. The candles we left burning sputtered out as shrieks pursued us. We regrouped outside beneath the anemic moon, too distraught to speak. Guilt washed over me when I noticed Sarah and Mike were absent. We were torn between fleeing this cursed house and finding our missing friends. But the choice was made for us by a flicker of light in the attic window. Against our better judgment, Susan and I crept back toward that beacon. Somehow, an eldritch force drew us back through the door, up the creaky steps, toward the flickering glow. It was not the pure light of fire, but something unnatural that throbbed and oozed like the lidless eye of a demon. The attic door stood ajar, a draft howling eerily through the gap. We clung to each other, whimpering, sweating though our skin was chilled to the bone. On leaden legs, we staggered through that narrow opening. Inside was a scene from a madman's nightmare. The Ouija board lay in the center of the room, the planchette spinning madly around it, untouched by human hands. Mike and Sarah huddled in opposite corners, eyes crazed, clawing at the walls as though desperate to escape. Dark tendrils of smoke snaked around them. All around, candles burned with black flames, dripping wax that sizzled like acid. The insidious light illuminated a large symbol scrawled on the sloping ceiling in what looked horribly like blood. Strange characters marked the walls, clearly traced by clawed, inhuman fingers. The atmosphere was unbearably oppressive, like the air before a violent storm. Every shadow seemed to harbor waiting demons. Mike and Sarah were utterly possessed by frenzied terror, beyond the reach of our pleading voices. Hopelessly, we turned to flee this nightmarish attic. But escape was not to be. Though we wrenched with hysterical strength, the door would not budge. Mocking laughter filled the room as we battered helplessly against it. When we turned back, 1,000 eyes awaited us from the darkness. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. We huddled together, weeping and screaming for release from our nightmare prison. But no help came, only ominous chuckles and slithering shadows. Strange eons seemed to pass as we slipped in and out of madness. At some hour past midnight, we felt the oppressive atmosphere begin to dissipate. The chittering darkness retreated, leaving only flickering candle stubs in the attic. In the returning quiet, I heard only the sound of soft sobbing and Mike's faint whispers as he prayed for salvation. Gradually, we found the courage to approach the door again. It swung open easily this time, as if it had never been stuck at all. As we helped Mike and Sarah down the stairs, the first rays of dawn shone through grimy windows. The ordeal was over. Once out of that house, which seemed almost benign by day, we swore never to trifle again with forces beyond our comprehension. We burned the Ouija board in the woods, exorcising its darkness with fire. To this day, I avoid anything remotely occult, for fear of awakening what I faced that night. Years later, researching the history of Mike's old house, I found disturbing reports of past tragedies buried in the archives of the local paper. In the black and white photographs of the original structure, I saw echoes of what we had experienced. Anna, it turned out, was no mere figment of an overactive imagination. Her death notice told of a girl who passed away in 1883 after a short illness. Her grieving family concealed her body in the cellar to preserve her innocent spirit. But it seems her lonely ghost remained, seeking solace from any visitor reckless enough to open doors to the other side. As for the ominous symbols we found scrawled in the attic, occult experts I consulted identified them as ritual markings meant to summon demonic entities. All evidence points to prior dark ceremonies in that house, ensuring it was a conduit for hellish forces. We had unwittingly stirred up those ancient evil currents, with terrifying consequences. In the decades since, I've learned just how foolish we were to trifle with forces far beyond our control. Ouija boards and seances seem harmless fun, but they can unlock doors best left shut and forgotten. Whatever dwells on the other side is not to be trusted. It is a realm of deception and manipulation, whose only aim is to prey on naive mortals. I post my cautionary tale online, hoping other curious teens don't fall into the same trap. But interest in the dark arts only seems to grow as each generation scoffs at the warnings of their elders. They play with magic, not comprehending the true risks. I can only pray they'll be spared the scars some of us bear from dancing with darkness and barely living to regret it. The Ouija board holds no real answers, only deception. Its riddles aim to lure the curious into danger. Those who look into its depths may see innocent faces looking back, but these masquerade diabolical forces ancient and cunning. Never forget that the darkness has its own cold intelligence, far outmatching our frail human reason. So I beg you to listen and learn from my folly. The Ouija's spirits tell pretty lies, spin phantom tales to reel in their catch. We who tested those waters live to regret it. Minds and nerves shattered by forces beyond comprehension. Curiosity killed far more than the cat when we meddled with powers no mortal can safely wield. Some nights, in my dreams, I still hear cruel whispers and see gleaming eyes draw near. That house and all its ghosts haunt me, a reminder never to let my guard down again. Ancient evils watch from the shadows, waiting to seize on human pride or reckless whim. Like sharks, they circle, seeking whom they may devour. Do not imagine you will master their dark arts or thwart their clever snares. Many have tried before you and left no trace, save for the tortured echoes of their screams. Those who contacted me spoke wisely. Let the dead rest. Do not linger where demons dwell. Evil that ancient cannot be dispelled, only shunned by those who value their lives and sanity. So let my warning stand. The unknown is not to be trifled with or flippantly courted. There are doors between worlds that must remain closed, for good reason. We get but one short life under the sun. Don't forfeit it to destructive curiosity. Keep your feet on solid earth and let the restless dead keep their secrets. I'm sharing my bone-chilling experience on Reddit as a cautionary tale for those who don't take tales of haunted dwellings seriously. My time in apartment 13 taught me that sometimes the veil between worlds wears thin, allowing unseen horrors to creep into our reality. When I first toured the apartment, located in a crumbling pre-war building, I was too dazzled by the reasonable rent and downtown location to notice any eerie vibe. The unit was a bit outdated, with creaky hardwood floors and drafty windows, but I figured that gave it character. Having just graduated college, I was thrilled to gain independence in a hip neighborhood at a price I could afford. At first, the quirks of the place seemed harmless, even charming. Door hinges groaned noisily whenever a breeze blew, which lent a cozy ambiance, like an old house settling in for the night. Distant conversations from neighboring units created a comforting sense of community. The building breathed with life despite its advanced age, but gradually, I became aware of sounds that didn't quite belong. Footsteps echoed from vacant floors above mine late at night, too solid to be ignored as the building's settling. I'd jolt awake convinced someone was right outside my bedroom, only to find nothing but silence hovering in the hall. Whispers emanated from corners of rooms where no one could possibly hide. I'd whip around quickly, seeking the source, but never caught more than a fading hiss. Friends claimed they heard nothing odd, so I wrote it off as the overactive imagination of a new renter. The sensations intensified slowly, interspersed with weeks of normalcy that lured me into complacency. A creeping melancholy infused the apartment that no amount of cheerful decor could dispel. I found myself making excuses not to spend time there, dawdling at the office or accepting any happy hour invitation after work. I dreaded returning to that oppressive solitude. One frigid night in deep December, I awoke to an utterly silent apartment. Snow blanketed the courtyard outside, muffling the usual city hum. But that wasn't what unsettled me. It was the total absence of those uncanny creaks and groans that constituted the building's nocturnal voice. Like a living being, it now held its breath. Shivering with more than cold, I sat up in bed, straining to hear any reassuring nighttime sounds. But there was only my own pounding heartbeat pulsing in my ears. The unnatural hush felt heavy, pregnant with anticipation of some unknowable horror. I did not sleep again that long night. When I confided in the building manager, he revealed that another renter had fled apartment 13 just 1 month before I'd moved in. She left unexpectedly in the dead of night, never returning to collect her belongings. No forwarding address was on record. The manager assured me no tragedy or crime had occurred to prompt her departure. But from then on, I noticed his uneasy glances at the door to hash 13, as if half expecting it to swing open by itself. His shakes of the head told me not to ask further questions, just to endure my lease and leave the mysteries of the place unexplored. But I could no longer ignore the signs of a presence that lurked in those walls alongside me. My showers inexplicably ran ice cold, the bathroom mirror fogged over with disembodied words. Fingers of frost crept across window panes despite the heat being cranked high. The welcoming apartment I'd moved into became a different place entirely. On a night when the wind howled fiercely around the century-old eaves, I understood the spirit's identity in a dreadful epiphany. The previous tenant hadn't departed. She was still here with me now, unseen, her restless essence haunting the very floors she once walked. I burned sage in every corner, uttering prayers I only half recalled from childhood. But the disturbances only worsened, no longer stealthy but brazen. Pots and pans crashed to the kitchen floor. Disembodied footsteps paced angrily overhead. My name rang out desperately in the empty rooms. That night, waking to an utterly unnatural cold engulfing my bed, I saw a shadowy figure looming over me. Translucent hands reached for my throat, as if acting out her own fate. I screamed myself hoarse, beyond hearing the racket that brought neighbors pounding on the door. But once inside, they heard only the wind moaning outside the shuddering panes. Of course, I concealed the full truth about the entity tormenting me as sleep deprivation took its toll. No one could understand the all-consuming dread that permeated apartment 13, leeching away all warmth and sanity. No average ghost story captured the primal evil radiating from those walls, so ancient and hungry. Begging release from my lease, I swallowed my pride and concealed nothing from the manager. His face blanched as I described flickering shadows that scuttled like roaches when I turned on lights. Even he could not deny the apartment's atmosphere had changed drastically since the previous tenant vanished that winter night. He agreed to let me break my lease, provided I spoke of it no further. But I could not restrain my story entirely, despite the incredulity it provoked, whispered online to those who dared believe. My account drew out others who'd suffered similar ordeals in innocuous apartments that harbored unseen menace. We found strength sharing our tales, proof we were neither liars nor insane. Some proposed theories on the true nature of what had infiltrated my home and psyche. Ancient evils that seeped into cracks between realities, manifesting as poltergeists, demons, or hungry ghosts. Whatever its origin, the entity had possessed that place, claiming it as a lair in which to torment the living. In the end, I fled that building altogether, unwilling to linger in its haunted orbit. I drove far out of town to stay with a friend while searching for a new apartment, leaving no forwarding address. Whatever malevolent force dwelt in those walls, I had no wish to remain its plaything, or worse, become another lost spirit whispering in its shadows. Though I told myself I'd escaped intact, in truth, my nights have not been the same since encountering that shapeless horror. I awake gripped by dread, my bedroom filled with unseen eyes peering from the darkest corners. Wisps of cold fingers trace down my neck. Unnatural croaks issue from empty closets. Desperate, I contact spiritual advisors to cleanse my new home, but their smudging and prayers only offer temporary relief. The entity I disturbed has marked me, clinging to my soul long after I abandoned apartment 13. It knows I briefly glimpsed the writhing chaos at the heart of its reality that drives minds mad. I know too much now to entirely belong to this sane mortal world. If you ever find yourself living amid such inexplicable disturbances, pray you have the wisdom to flee quickly. Do not convince yourself your mind is playing tricks, or that you can solve the mystery rationally. Protect your sanity above all else, before the entity twists your thoughts toward darkness. No earthly logic applies to these hungry things that infiltrate our reality through cracks too small to see. They crave fear and worship from us, like demons of antiquity. Resist the allure of communing with them or probing their unknowable motives. Detach yourself from their realm completely, for they will pursue your essence through many dwellings, attracted to your light. Call them ghosts, specters, demons, whatever name brings comfort against the unnameable. But rest assured they lurk in far more homes than commonly believed, feasting on despair. Their true feast comes when they sufficiently poison a mind toward utter madness, a state they relish. Never lose sight of your own essence while in their clutches. Some say they visit retribution on the wicked, but such judgment is not for them to dispense. Their wickedness is of a deeper strain, divorced utterly from human morality, though they will fake such principles to manipulate you. To them, we are mere cattle to be fed upon until our minds and life force are drained. Do not be fooled into pardoning their parasitic ways. Flee at the very first sign of their tricks seeping through the plaster, the whispers and the static of your radio, glinting eyes in the dark. Shut your ears to their seductive lies and silence. No answers worth gleaning exist in their howling void. Your sanity is the only thing worth preserving, at any cost. Let seekers of forbidden mysteries succumb to the dark if they're so eager to look within. Guard your mental landscape against their intrusive fingerprints, so you don't carry their taint within you for life. Those of us who came too close, yet managed to break free, must be vigilant. We only sleep now with one eye open, peppering holy water across each threshold and windowsill. We jump at every unexplained creak, our fight-or-flight reflexes hair-triggered. But such hypervigilance is the price of being marked by wolves. Let my folly caution you against engaging with those chaotic forces. Keep your distance lest they infect your blood, reduce you to a nervous wretch or gibbering lunatic haunted till death, never belonging fully to either world. Better to live in ignorant daylight than endure what I have known. That just one closed door away, hellish dimensions writhe, their denizens hungry for our precious life essences, craving ownership of our vulnerable souls. Even a thin wall stands as fortress if you harbor no curiosity about the infernal dominion it conceals. Board up your ears to muffled cries within abandoned rooms where you once slept. Forget their cold caresses down your throat and feverish whispers offering poisoned knowledge. Sever all cords to those lightless realms, lest their claws dig into your spirit, dragging you back through a crack too narrow to breach unless invited. Do not repeat my dire mistake of lingering, entertaining their spectral thrall once alerted to their presence. Run and keep running until you find an untainted domicile far from their oozing grasp. Only then may you, with luck, evade their patient invasion of your thoughts, your dreams, your soul. So I caution you in the strongest terms to flee the first signs of their trickery. Ignore false comfort offered by those trapped in denial. The burden lies on you alone to discern their deception and break away completely, if you care at all for the fate of your sanity. You alone can shut them out for good, refusing all further contact. For they will always want more than you can give without losing your very self. Remember this when you hear the 3 a.m. whispers and footsteps outside your room. Recall my warning when the wheedling voices implore you answer their call. Deny them, and you will keep sacred the life force granted you. Submit yourself, and who knows what infernal pacts you may unwittingly seal, surrendering your delicate soul. Protect it with utter conviction, no matter the lure dangled before you. Only then, having severed all ties to those fiends in the darkness, may you again sleep undisturbed by nightmares not your own. Silence. Their siren songs with eternal resolve. Let evil fester untended in lightless realms. Seek your bliss only under the sun, fleeting yet warming your skin. Cherish each breath gifted you beneath the open sky. Give no quarter to those patient demons who salivate for your pain. They own nothing you do not first surrender. I'm sharing my spine-chilling tale on Reddit in hopes of finding others who've had similar brushes with the unexplained. My late-night drive through the countryside last summer became a harrowing journey into darkness that still haunts my dreams. That night, I just needed to get away from the crowds and chaos of the city for a while. A long solo drive seemed like the perfect escape. I'd always found the countryside peaceful at night, with its rolling fields blanketed in moonlight. Cities never truly sleep, but out among the farms and forests, one can feel enveloped by the stillness. So I gassed up my aging sedan and headed out of town as the sun sank below the horizon. The lights of the suburbs faded behind me as I turned onto narrow rural roads that wound between stands of trees and open meadows. Other than the occasional car passing in the opposite lane, I was alone. Overhead, a full moon emerged, casting the landscape in silver blue light. I drove for over an hour, letting my mind empty. Out here, the noise and headaches of urban life melted away. No blaring horns or sirens, just the whisper of the wind and the gentle thrum of my tires on cracked asphalt. Eventually, the scattered farmhouses petered out, and the road entered a denser forest. Trees crowded in close on both sides, their branches interlaced overhead. I flicked on my high beams, but they barely cut through the inky gloom beneath the canopy. Shadows flickered at the corners of my vision, leaves rustling as creatures scurried away from the intruding headlights. The further I drove into those ancient woods, the more a subtle unease crept under my skin. I tried to shrug it off as imaginary nerves from spending too much time alone with my thoughts, but my hands gripped the wheel tighter, betraying my unspoken dread. The stillness felt oppressive now, heavy with anticipation, as if the forest held its breath, waiting. A branch cracked loudly to my right and I jumped, heart hammering. "You're being ridiculous," I told myself. It was just a deer or other night creature startled by the car. There was nothing sinister about these quiet rural roads, but I couldn't fully silence my primal instincts, honed over eons to spot danger in the dark. Rounding a curve, I passed an opening in the trees and glimpsed the full moon suspended above a meadow. Dark shapes dotted the tall grass, perhaps livestock huddled asleep. But in my peripheral vision, one shape stood upright, too tall to be a grazing animal. I slowed reflexively, peering into the night-shrouded field. The shadowy figure remained motionless, half obscured by wisps of fog drifting across the moonlit plain. An icy tendril of fear curled down my spine. Some primitive impulse told me not to linger here. I sped up, preferring to put distance between myself and that ominous silhouette. Soon the forest enclosed me again, branches grasping from both sides as if to bar my path. They scraped the roof and sides of the cars it passed, like bony claws trying to hold me back. Glancing up through the sunroof, I could see only slivers of the moon through the tangled boughs. Its pale light barely illuminated the road ahead. The asphalt gave way to rutted dirt as I continued onward, jostled by potholes. The trees here looked older, primordial almost, their twisted trunks as thick as houses. They lined the road in silent sentinel, their shadowy forms made spectral by the faint moonlight. I wished desperately for the comfort of other headlights or houses, any sign of human presence. But I was utterly alone. Then I spotted her in the glare of my high beams, the woman in the tattered white gown, her face obscured by matted hair. She stood at the side of the road, unnaturally still among the swaying underbrush. My heart seized as I slammed the brakes, seatbelt locking across my chest. I sat frozen, engine idling, my mind unable to accept what my eyes relayed. How could someone be out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour? She must have emerged from the woods, I reasoned. Perhaps her car had broken down and she needed help. I considered stopping, but hesitated, gripped by primal dread. Some instinct screamed at me to get away from her, from this road, from the looming trees that caged me. As my mind reeled, the woman turned, as if sensing my gaze. The headlights illuminated her features in stark relief. She was young, with sharp cheekbones and full lips. But what terrified me were her eyes, two gaping black voids, like holes carved out of reality. They were utterly empty, devoid of soul or humanity. Icy horror flooded my veins. In that horrific instant, I knew with perfect clarity that no help could be rendered, no comfort offered to this being. She radiated pure malignance, an unearthly predator. As our gazes locked across the distance, her lips stretched slowly into an uncanny smile that made my stomach drop like I was falling from a great height. My body took over, slamming the car into reverse, tires spitting up gravel as I tore backwards down that narrow lane. The woman stood motionless as I retreated, growing smaller in my rearview mirror, still wearing that grotesque grin. The further I got from her, the more I could breathe again, the vice around my chest loosening. But relief was short-lived as a bone-chilling wail pierced the air. That inhuman keening sent panic flooding through my limbs anew. I switched to drive and floored the gas, fog swirling in my wake as I fishtailed around the tight bend. Her anguished screams followed me as I sped recklessly through the night. Daring to glance in the mirror again, my blood turned to ice. Impossibly, she now stood in the middle of the road, receding in the distance. Yet her wails remained loud, as if carried on the wind itself. I gripped the wheel with sweaty hands, lay out unable to tear my eyes away as her form grew smaller and smaller, still discernible by her white garment. Even from a great distance, I sensed she watched me. The weight of her empty gaze settled heavily on my shoulders, dredging up primal fears from my species' infancy. I cannot fully describe in words the visceral, gut-wrenching terror I experienced, only that I have never felt its like before or since. It went beyond the physical, striking to my very soul. The old sedan's engine growled as I pushed it to its limits down the endless wooded lane. The woman's form remained visible, keeping pace impossibly as her garment fluttered in the wind. Her anguished cries urged me faster through the dark maze of trees as panic overrode all rational thought. I might have driven off the road or struck a tree, but sheer animal instinct kept the car straight as I fled that otherworldly predator. How long I drove, hunched over the wheel, muscles burning with adrenaline, I cannot say. Time lost all meaning as my mind teetered on the brink of madness. The woman's wails and the hypnotic blur of passing trees melded into a surreal, waking nightmare. I ceased to know where I was or how I'd arrived here, only that I desperately longed to awaken from the all-consuming terror. Through the passenger window I glimpsed the moon again, riding low above the horizon. Had so much time passed, or was this some strange corner of existence where natural laws fell away? The painted light lent the woods an alien cast, as though I traveled through the lands of ancient lore, where forgotten evils still roamed beneath the moon. I do not know what would have become of me had daybreak not arrived when it did. As the first faint glow filtered through the ominous trees, the woman's shrieks reached a fever pitch. Looking back, I saw her ghostly form freeze, still as a statue among the swirling fog. Her ebony eyes found mine one final time, gleaming with predatory cunning and an ageless hunger I shudder to recall even now. As golden light spilled across the horizon, she vanished like smoke on the breeze. I gunned the engine recklessly, exiting those accursed woods onto a wider highway bathed in dawn. Other cars whooshed past, mundane commuters on their morning routes, the first living souls I had seen in what felt like eons, spent wandering an endless nightmare. I pulled onto the shoulder, tremors racking my exhausted body as I laid my head against the wheel. Tears of relief spilled down my cheeks at having escaped that unnatural purgatory. In the sane radiance of morning, it all seemed some fever dream born of loneliness and darkened country roads. But my hammering heart betrayed the truth, that I had glimpsed, however fleetingly, a realm beyond reason or science. In the weeks that followed, I scoured the internet and local lore for clues to what I had encountered. No facts could fully explain the primal dread and defied reality I experienced on that lonely stretch of rural roadway. But scattered accounts online revealed I was not alone. Others too had crossed paths with that wandering spirit on the fringes of the wild, her unholy wails forever haunting their memories. Some reported seeing her drifting silently through the trees by the light of the moon, clad only in her gossamer white burial shroud. A few claimed she memorized their license plates as they passed, cursing them to a gruesome fate. Most had sped away like me into the sanctuary of daylight, grateful to escape her insatiable otherworldly malice. But none could offer any insight into her origins or motives. At best, they theorized she was some elemental force of the forest, a wraith-like creature not fully tied to our earthly realm. Perhaps in life, she had been one of the unfortunate souls whose vehicle broke down on a forgotten backroad, only to fall prey to forces ancient and hungry. Or she harbored some unimaginable darkness even before death claimed her. Those bottomless eyes certainly reflected no human spirit. Whatever the truth, I know her wooded haunts are best avoided by the living, especially after night falls and the moon rides high. Roads that seem charmingly rustic by day become primeval and treacherous beneath her pale gaze. Only burning daylight can keep her fully at bay, dissolving the veil she thrives in. Let her keep to the lost corners of the wild she seems bound to, while we hug close the hearth fires of civilization. I share my tale so others may learn from my brush with primordial terror and deathless predation. We modern humans tread such a narrow island of light and reason. Beyond it lurk forces from ages before records began, when darkness and superstition governed mortal minds. While we slumber in our sheltered halls, primordial nightmares still stalk the farthest forest paths. So I beg you, beware the lonely crossroads and overgrown lanes. Nature's beauty conceals terrors beyond words that wait patiently for the unwary. My night of endless driving and fleeing her ravenous spirit gave me but the smallest taste of these timeless evils. We glimpse them only rarely, before fleeing back into placid normalcy, praying our minds will blot out what we witnessed in the shadows. But know that she, and perhaps others like her, patiently haunt the boundary between worlds, between the sane circle of firelight and the hungry darkness that presses ever inward. On certain moonlit nights, when the air hangs heavy with forgotten mystery, you may hear her distant screams echoing eternally through the black wilderness. Pay them no heed. Just say a prayer for the lost and keep driving towards the familiar glow of home. I'm sharing this bone-chilling tale on Reddit as a cautionary warning to those fascinated by the supernatural. My nighttime visit to an abandoned graveyard unearthed secrets and spirits best left undisturbed. It started as a dare among friends one Halloween night after too much candy and not enough parental supervision. We were young teens, overwhelmed with bravado, eager to prove our daring. Sneaking into the fenced-off old cemetery seemed the perfect rite of courage. We squeezed through a gap in the rusted wrought iron fence, scurrying amid tilting tombstones like mice through a stone maze. Nervous laughter echoed through the neglected burial ground as we scanned for ghosts. But the night remained still, no spirits rushing forth to admonish our trespassing. Emboldened, we split up to explore, shoving each other and boasting of our boldness. In the beam of my flashlight, the moss-covered monuments seemed harmless enough, if decrepit from decades of neglect. This was nothing compared to the haunted houses and gory movies that thrilled us. But as I ventured toward the older plots, a subtle shift occurred. The wind picked up, stirring dead leaves across the buckled pavement with a sound like scuttling claws. The bare tree branches cast grasping shadows in the cold moonlight. Carved angels gazed down with stern disapproval. The crooked rows of weathered headstones seemed to close in around me. Dates from the centuries past reflected lives lost to time. Tiny graves marked children dead in infancy. The dusty urns and stone flowers hinted at grief distilled into cold, hard memorials. Amid those time-worn memorials, the boasts of my friends sounded childish rather than courageous. Surrounded by the legions of the dead, our brazen mockery seemed vulgar. We were interlopers in a realm not meant for foolhardy boys. I opened my mouth to call the others back, only to be halted by an unearthly sound. A soft whisper drifted through the tombstones, barely audible, yet chilling my bones. It spoke no distinct words, yet conveyed a deep and inconsolable sorrow. I froze, flashbeam gripped tight, unsure if the others were playing some trick. But no human vocal cords could produce such a haunting, ethereal sigh. It echoed from all around me, as if the very ground was exhaling the grief of those buried within it. Goosebumps prickled my arms as the eerie lament continued. Some instinct told me to flee back to the safety of the streetlights, but morbid curiosity drew me toward the source, an imposing stone mausoleum with an iron gate. I crept up the crumbling steps to the entrance, where the spectral whispers grew louder, interwoven with soft weeping. Peering through the bars, my light revealed a pale figure within, a young woman in tattered Victorian dress, her face obscured by long dark tresses. She slowly raised her head, eyes gleaming like cold stars in the shadows. Her voice, clearer now, pleaded for company to ease her loneliness. I staggered back, nearly tumbling from the stairs. The hairs on my neck bristled as she grasped the gate with one skeletal hand. Icy fingers seemed to trace down my spine as she called me to join her. The night air vibrated with voices, no longer one, but many wraiths stirring from their slumber. I turned and fled blindly, no thought of finding my friends, only escape. The spectral chorus pursued me, voices rising in anguish, desperate not to be abandoned again. I scrambled over toppled tombstones and fallen angels, stumbling amid the graves. A root snared my foot and I went sprawling, flashlight flying from my grip. I lay frozen on the cold ground, enveloped in darkness as the whispers converged upon me. They pleaded, they cursed, they bargained for my companionship. Shadowy forms fluttered at the edge of my vision. Pure panic drove me upward again, heedless of my skinned knees and throbbing ankle. I ran like never before, banshee wails echoing after me until I squeezed out the iron fence. I collapsed on the sidewalk, dizzy with relief under the streetlight's sane glow. In the weeks that followed, I told no one of my experience, fearing ridicule and psychiatrists. I avoided the graveyard even in daylight, when it appeared mundane again. But those spirits' mournful cries still haunted my dreams. Years later in college, I found the courage to research that old cemetery and its history. Buried in library archives were tales of tragedy that illuminated my supernatural encounter. Many spirits lingered there who had passed violently or in deep despair. The woman in the mausoleum was one Ella Blackwood, buried in 1862 after pining away from heartbreak. Her lover left to make his fortune out west, never to return. Wasting away, Ella was interred while still clinging to life, it was said. Her anguished spirit remained trapped between realms, seeking solace from strangers. Other unfortunate souls populated the old burial ground. Convicts hanged from an oak on the grounds. The broken-hearted spurned by families. The poor and unknown buried in unmarked pits. All had passed in sorrow, left to fade from memory. Until, perhaps, some reckless visitor might stir them from their melancholic slumber. I now understood the great gift and privilege it is to still draw breath under the sun. Those spirits had so much left undone, cut short by misfortune. In their isolation, they envied the living and reached out desperately for companionship. But the veil between realms is best left undisturbed. I share my cautionary tale so you might avoid repeating my youthful recklessness. Graveyards may appear quaint places for daytime strolls, but at night, they awaken with spirits who still cling to their grief, rage, and unfulfilled dreams. We must not add to their sorrow by trespassing, where the dead keep their own company. Let them rest undisturbed beneath aged monuments, kept from fading by carved names and occasional offerings. Bear them no ill will, but do not intrude upon their domain. We all will join their silent congregation soon enough. But while we yet live, it is our duty to squeeze every drop of joy and passion from these fleeting days in the sun. Cherish your beating heart and the breath in your lungs. Savor your senses that let you feel summer breeze, taste cold water, admire a sunrise. Do not take one moment for granted, for it could be your last. Listen to music, laugh with friends, whisper words of love and kindness. These simple acts are momentous for those stripped of everything but regret. As for the spirits who stir when we wander where we ought not to go, forgive them their envy and their appeals. In their own way, they only reach out for the warmth we still possess. They cannot help but crave our light, for they dwell in an eternity of cold darkness. but we must guard that precious light within us during our short time here. Do not surrender even a sliver of it to those who have none left. When our turn comes to join their silent world, we will understand the value of each fleeting breath, each ray of sunlight we took for granted. Until then, let us scatter more joy than sorrow as we pass through, leaving memories that glow bright long after we're gone. In this way, we too may gentle the grief of those we leave behind. When you visit graveyards, do so to honor the dead, not to disturb their peace. Bring blossoms, speak their names, share their tales, and remember well that your day too shall come. Death makes equals of us all in the end. But first, we must live with hearts open to all the beauty this realm yet has to offer. That is how we make our lives worthy of remembrance. So I beg you, seize your precious moments in this world and savor them fully. Keep to the light, honor the past, but do not seek forbidden knowledge not meant for the living. Leave the unhappy dead to fade on their own, and nurture your own spirit's flame so it burns bright long after your body rests beneath the earth. That is the lesson the graveyard taught me. Cherish this wisdom and value your life.